Welcome back to Empathetic Presence, a podcast to liberate our voices. I'm Lee Bonfasudo, your host, and we have a lot of conflict in our world right now. I am really conflict avoidant, and like so many things, I'm a student of conflict. I am learning from teachers. I am practicing navigating conflict. And today I am honored to interview one of my teachers, Nicole Bauman, who is a facilitator in the worlds of transformative justice, somatics, and nonviolent communication. They see building conflict resiliency as an essential part of living in the world to come, and they are passionate about creating spaces where personal and collective liberation feel possible. Welcome, Nicole. I'm so glad that you're here.
So good to be here, Lee. I'm really excited to be in this conversation with you.
I was just thinking about how much I've learned about conflict from you as someone who is naturally very conflict avoidant.
You are not alone. Not alone in that at all. With you in it, in fact, part of the reason that this is the work that I do, unshockingly.
Yes, I know, and we all teach what we need, and I love that. And so I would love to hear, Nicole, how do you use your voice in this moment and in general?
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Just feeling into what is live today, and some of how what's coming up in this moment is just where I am this week and what I'm up to this week, which is feeling very connected to some of the work I've been doing around organizing for a free Palestine, and hosted a potluck and fundraiser in my local community last night, and really feel uh just like feel the tenderness of what's happening in Palestine right now.
Yeah.
Um and parenting. I have a 7.5-year-old kiddo, and it's one of the places where I get to have the most consistently challenging opportunities to practice empathy and what I bring to the world and how to be in my values around that. Yeah, it's always there. And a lot of what I'm up to is really supporting folks in conflict to in life, therefore in conflict, intention to have a little more of a toolkit and a little more capacity to show up to conflict with more hope for it to be generative. And
Yeah.
that really for the sake of collective liberation. So having seen over and over again in my own life in movement spaces and so many places how often conflict really just like breaks down our beautiful collaborations. I do work one on one and with groups and in all kinds of ways to try to allow us to actually work together and be together in the ways we need.
Wow, Nicole. And this is why I wanted to talk to you because this moment of conflict and historical
Yeah.
conflict with our little ones, hearing you talk about parenting is this consistently challenging place to practice this work. And
Mm-hmm.
what first really attracted me to your work, and I had wanted to study nonviolent communication for quite some time and to learn more about conflict navigation, but hearing you talk about it, a lens of undoing domination,
Mm-hmm.
and to think about Palestine and what we're witnessing there and the ongoing generational historical domination and oppression, and so the way that this carries through so much of your work, and it is so essential right now that we
Yeah.
build tools for managing conflict.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I loved in starting to work with you is realizing that empathy is at the core. And I just like want to talk about that word.
Mm,
Yeah, like what does that word even mean to you?
yeah. Yeah, talking about the word feels really important because I think the word gets misunderstood or just used in different ways by different people in different contexts. And I think what what feels really important to me is that it's like being with, like really being with what is true for whether that's for myself or for another person. And one of my teachers talks about really making the important distinction between empathy and agreement, which feels really important inside of this political moment. Like, I can have empathy. Yeah, I can have empathy actually for um, why the Israeli government is doing what it is doing to Palestinian communities right now. There's just like an incredible legacy of trauma inside of Jewish community. Of course, that is one small piece of it. There's also major funding from the country that we live in. So there's like these other aspects, but having empathy, I guess what I'm pointing to there is like having empathy for why someone might choose to take a violent action is really seeing that behind every action, there's a beautiful attempt to meet a human need. And just because I have empathy for that doesn't mean that I agree with that choice or condone an act that does harm or violence. And that's a hard one for a lot of us. And I think what allows us to stay human is being able to find that capacity to hold both things at the same time.
Wow. This is why I wanted to speak with you. And before we even like dive into empathy, there's this spaciousness that you have when you're facilitating in this space in a conversation. There's a spaciousness that I've been aware of that you bring when you're facilitating and when you're holding space that almost like creates the empathy. It's that spaciousness. And I just wanted to acknowledge that because it's between the words. It's nonverbal. It's
Mm-hmm.
who we are as human beings. And, you know, so much of what you just shared speaks so deeply because the first time that you and I worked together was probably October 2023.
Yeah.
And for myself, as a person with Jewish lineage lost in the Holocaust, I've always been like deeply obsessed with how can the Israeli government treat Palestinians this way,
Yeah.
and seeing it with my own eyes and talking to Palestinian friends. And that distinction that you just said of we
Mm-hmm.
can acknowledge empathy without agreeing is
Yeah.
really opening my mind right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It is not in our culture at all. It's not what most of us are
Right.
taught possible. There's like, uh, including on the left, where there's all kinds of emphasis around inclusion, etc. We are taught a very hard, like right, wrong, good and bad, in and out. And I don't think it's serving us. And not that we
Yeah.
don't need to have clarity about like our values and our integrity and our commitment, for me at least, a commitment to like life and liberation. But
Yeah.
it is important to me to also hold space for the humanity of folks who are doing violence.
Wow.
Because I do too,
Wow.
right? Like I also do violence and harm.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that's some of the most healing work that I have done personally inside of working with nonviolent communication and empathy is like turning that on myself and
Yeah.
really decolonizing my own internal voices and my own internal judgments and really actually like connecting more to my own beautiful needs and all the ways that I am trying to meet them, some of them very misguided. Some of the strategies like really not actually meeting my needs or at the cost of other needs. And
Wow.
starting with empathy for the self is a lot of what we practice in the classes that I teach and facilitation that I do and coaching that I do. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my observations from your work. And I worked with you in this group space of working on conflict in late 2023. And it
Yeah.
was that awareness of, oh, I thought we were going to really jump into conflict, but it started with internal empathy. It started with building empathy and compassion for ourselves.
Mhm.
And I also love what you just shared because I really believe that we're just in such a binary society and it's good
Mhm.
or bad, it's right. And even as a non-binary person, I default to the binary
Yeah.
so much, right?
Yeah.
And
Totally.
so I want to think about like how do you think about conflict in general?
How do I think about conflict in general? I still am terrified of it, even though it is the work
Really?
that I do. So I just
Really?
want to like hold so much compassion and
Oh,
dignity for myself, for all of us who are like so have experienced such dysfunctional and harmful conflict. Like, of
yeah.
course, we're scared of it. Of course, some of us have a big away where we're like conflict avoidant, and some folks. This language here comes a little bit more from the somatics background that I'm trained in, of Strozzi and generative somatics and embodying racial justice. But we talk about a towards or an against or an away as different ways we show up. And they're all beautiful strategies that we have adapted to try to stay safer inside of conflict moments. And most of us
Mm,
don't actually have the tools to move with generativity and actually see conflict as an opportunity for more connection. And that's really the practice that I have been in personally, and is a lifelong practice of choosing to that paradigm shift. I think really like, what if conflict was actually an opportunity for deepening learning and connection instead of something to run away from? and
wow.
and I see it happening for people and for myself as I practice more. And I think that self empathy, like you said, I start there in classes because it's self empathy is resourcing and healing, and it gives us
Yeah.
more capacity, more bandwidth to have genuine empathy for another when we have offered that to ourselves, and to be able to be with a wider range of emotion, expression, intensity, to just like conflict so often asks us to
Yeah.
really expand, right? To expand what we think is possible for us to hold, to hear, to receive, to expand our perspective. And that's really hard to do if we don't feel safe enough, centered enough, held enough to know that we're not going to be obliterated or like lose our belonging, lose our community.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
through being with intensity with another person. Yeah.
The way you talk about the expansiveness of conflict, which is so different than I think our societal understand my
Mhm.
personal when I hear the word conflict, I constrict.
Mhm.
I want to protect, and then hearing
Mhm.
you talk about like this baseline of safety,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I'm thinking about this so much right now. And so, how
Yeah.
do we move into conflict when we don't feel safe, or how do we
Mhm.
cultivate safety
Mhm.
in conflict?
Yeah, these are such good questions, such important questions, such, as you named, just like really relevant questions. And I think, again, this is where self empathy can come in. And for me, as I probably said many times in the class you were in, empathy is really a body based practice for me. It's
Mhm.
a somatic practice in that we are tuning in to what are we feeling. So I'm trying to think of an example. If I'm like choosing whether or not I want to like go film a law enforcement situation happening on my street, there's like a lot happening in my body as I decide whether or not to do that as a white person in a very mixed race neighborhood, as a gender fabulous trans kind of person.
Yeah.
And where I can start is like, first I want to offer the little caveat of like, we want to be real. I want to be really clear that in situations of like overt violence and abuse, like let's take care of ourselves and remove ourselves from a situation and keep ourselves safe and keep each other safe as much as we can. And in this
Yeah.
example, where I'm going is like me slowing down enough to feel my own sense of um, whatever risk, fear, activation is happening in my body,
Mm.
anticipating whatever risk could be very possible, and getting to actually honor it and like notice what it's pointing me towards. Like, what is this tightness in my chest or this constriction in my belly or a feeling of like curling into myself telling me about what I need? And in this case, there's probably many needs up, but slowing down enough to be like getting curious. There's something about safety there, something about belonging and my own dignity. And
Yeah.
if when I can be in a regular practice of slowing down and kind of like honoring and nourishing those things for myself, and then also being live in the moment, able more and more to notice what is old, like what of my sense of lack of safety is fear based or from the past. And can I reassure my literal nervous system right now that there's
Mhm.
enough safety? I have enough safety to stay. And that's like a practice over time and it's going to look different for different bodies and different situations, obviously. But that's where self-empathy kind of meets somatic practice trauma healing is like reestablishing our felt sense of safety and belonging enough to show up to intense situations, to literally put my body on the line if I so choose for the sake of my community.
Yep. And a lot of us are making these sorts of decisions daily right now.
Yeah.
And it feels really, to have even language around this, Nicole, is so helpful, even just slowing down. And that's been
Yeah.
my own somatic practice of like, oh, my life is actually slowing down as I can be
Mm-hmm.
more aligned, really,
Yeah.
brain and body.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and I just love that self practice as a
Mm-hmm.
starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Really
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is a reprogramming, I think, that
Yeah.
happens little by little over time with the repetition of practice, and it does shift. And like so many
Yeah.
people coming into my classes, like you named, people are like, give me the script for how to do conflict
No.
better. And that's not what I give people. And I hear back from so many people that giving them a tangible empathy practice does make a big difference.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. It's changed my life quite a bit, and so much of what we did together was really like I brought it to my personal life, my
Yeah.
community, my
Yeah.
neighbors, using it
Mm,
every day of just this
mm,
practice of checking in and slowing down. I always wondered, is this taught, or are we born with it? Is it then disruptive by
mm,
oppressive systems of domination, or is it nurture? Is it nature? Is empathy learned? And I wonder what you think about that.
mm. Yeah, I love these questions. And I don't know all the answers scientifically or neuroscientifically speaking, but I know my own experience and what have observed around me, which is that people can and do learn empathy, and that very actively been dominated out of us in all kinds of
Yeah.
ways, socialized out of us, that our brains were like evolved to flourish and learn best in relationality, in like attuning and resonating with one
Wow.
another. And that's empathy, is like feeling with other humans and feeling for our interconnectedness. And a lot of that we lose. A lot of that and lose is like uh an inadequate word. It's like really
Oh,
stolen from us. It's a cultural wound and a severance, I think. And we can regrow it. This is like the beauty of neuroplasticity. And Sarah Payton is
yeah.
one of my teachers, and she started studying nonviolent communication decades ago, and then did a deep dive that became her whole career, basically studying the neuroscience of what is empathy and how does it work. And her work has been so transformative to really help me really trust the ability of our brains to lay down these new neural pathways and actually grow more ability to heal with empathy, with empathic presence and resonance.
Empathic presence and resonance. It's part of our humanity, and I know that. And yet, Elon Musk said that empathy is the greatest weakness of
Mm-hmm.
Western civilization. And Hannah Arendt apparently said similar things, that seeing the lack of empathy is always the first sign of societies being broken apart and dominated and oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And it must be really powerful if
Yeah.
people are so set on stealing it from us, as you so beautifully said. And why is it so powerful that people are set to take it away from us?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I feel the grief that comes up as you ask that question, as you bring that
Yeah.
question, because of the way this is being weaponized right now for uh, in service of billionaires,
Yep.
uh, continuing to amass power at the expense of all of us. And like truly, I think that is only possible to perpetuate if you have stopped feeling.
Wow.
Like I guess that's where I'm landing. Like I don't know
Wow.
how. And as I say that, I'm like, oh yeah, and like me too. Like my life depends on an immense amount of extraction and violence and colonization that I've benefited from every day. And actually
Yeah.
re-accessing my ability to face that and feel that is what helps me reclaim my life,
Wow.
humanity, and is like fuel for doing something about it. And so I often talk about, there's one whole session you may remember where we just talk about feeling and the radical act of re-accessing feeling and body sensation as an act of decolonizing,
Yeah.
because it serves those in power if we don't feel. And if we don't feel the heartbreak of harm that's being done, we're much more likely to go along with fascism, go along with anything if we don't see how we're impacted. Yeah.
Yeah, so much of what you're saying reminds me, most of my clients are in corporate settings,
Mm-hmm.
and so many people who come to see me, first of all, they're getting this feedback that they need more executive presence, which is just coded language for, professionalism and white supremacy at work.
Yeah.
But it's also they're being told that they're too sensitive, or that they feel too much, or that they have too much empathy. And so what are people who maybe want to continue in those environments, in those dominating environments, how
Mm-hmm.
can they still access empathy or leverage empathy when they're being told that it is a weakness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So painful. Like I just really feel in listening to you name all of that how crushing these systems are, like how they, so many systems, even the most well-intentioned settings, most of our businesses, corporations, nonprofits, like justice-minded spaces are still set up with a lot of domination mechanisms in place that don't make space for us to bring our full humanity. And yeah, there's a number of layers coming up there with that question. I think some of what I'm feeling is just like, how do we keep making space to grieve that that kind of narrative or reality is true for some of the corporate folks that you're working with?
Yeah.
And making space for grief and rage and feeling is like a whole other piece of my work and practice and exploration now. It feels very connected to what we're talking about.
Wow.
And the other piece that was coming through as you were offering that inquiry and just feeling for the words, it's like, how do we also get choiceful and like contained in a good way around when and how we are expressing what? Um, and and
Hmm.
when we are offering empathy to others, really remembering that we want to be in choice and within our capacity around that too, or that's another form of violence to ourselves.
Yeah.
And overextension is often doesn't land as empathy when
Right.
it is not centered.
I love that phrase that you shared, which is being in choice. And I've heard you say that in your trainings too. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is, our agency, our ability to make choices, which anxiety and these silencing systems can take away so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the connection of grief.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk a little bit more just about your work in general? And you mentioned grief, and I know you do conflict navigation work. How can folks engage with your work?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm really excited about a lot of the work that I'm offering right now and really grateful for that to be true. I had a friend ask me recently something about like, how are you feeling about your work in this moment? And I was just like, actually, I feel even more convicted that what I am up to is necessary, given that we are living in that continues to explode in so many ways. So
Absolutely.
these classes we keep referring to are one of the things that I offer that are a really wonderful way for folks to start to connect with my work. So navigating conflict is an 8-week online course that will actually happen again this fall, starting at the beginning of September through the Good Work Institute. And all of that can be linked in the show notes. And then navigating feedback is like a deeper dive with some of that same toolkit, which is nonviolent communication plus somatics plus undoing domination, undoing oppression, with a focus on giving and receiving feedback with care. And that will be happening later this fall. And I do one-on-one coaching with folks too. And some of that is more explicitly conflict coaching, where we might be working on a live active conflict thing or communication and conflict tools and skills. And then I also do healing centered coaching that really incorporates a lot of somatics and embodiment and is a container in which I support folks around their own healing for the sake of healing and transformation, and especially working with folks who are doing liberation work, justice work in some form to really be able to show up more fully to collective liberation. And then I do a variety of other work. I'm running my first year-long cohort and getting ready to launch a second year of a cohort called Weaving New Ritual with a co-facilitator. And this is a year-long program that's for white folks of Christian lineage who are using the wheel of the year to reclaim ritual fluency and also excavate like what inside of this Christian lineage might we want to call forward for the sake of collective liberation, and what might we need to compost as we work on unraveling whiteness. And we launched last summer, not knowing how timely this work would be as we see Christian nationalism on the rise. So for me, as someone
Yes.
who left the Christian church spaces I grew up in a long time ago, as a queer person for a variety of reasons, it has been incredibly powerful to consider what does it mean for me to actually say, this story is mine too. And there's a different
Wow.
narrative possible here. And I am not letting the right define this tradition. And there's so much liberatory narrative inside of this lineage. Um, So up to that work with like other white folks, other folks of Christian lineage, and like what does it mean to really also then see our like Trump supporting folks of white Christian lineage as kin and to like learn how to have empathy and connection inside of some of those most challenging spaces, including with my own relatives, you know? I want to speak the name of Susan Rathbo, one of my elders and teachers, a white queer person who just turned 60 and just walked across the country last year. And she's someone I'm really looking to and being inspired by as she's done a lot of thinking and working and feeling around what does it mean to like really be in that work of presence and connection and empathy with those who are hardest as other white people to be with.
I'm so grateful for you doing this work, all of the work, but also the self work. I think that you are
Mm-hmm.
really creating models for how we all must do this work. And, so many of my Black and Muslim and Palestinian friends have talked about for the last 2 years how essential it is that people who share a Jewish lineage and white people are talking about this. And so finding ways to do this work within our own communities, the unraveling, that word unraveling ourselves and our own narrative and
Mm-hmm.
our own habits and the continue the domination we witness in so many different levels. So I'm just grateful to you for doing that work and modeling it.
Mm, yeah, thank you. I'm so grateful to get to be offering it and holding space and being in that work with myself, with others.
I think it's really important also for listeners to hear how we're all caring for ourselves right now. And
Yeah.
it's a hard question, right? It's this pull between like wanting to be really involved and to do so
Yeah.
much, and then really knowing that we need rest and we need healing and safety. And so,
Mm-hmm.
Nicole, what are you doing to care for yourself right now?
Thank you for that question. We really do need it. And yeah, I gardening is one of the big ones for me. And um, spending a lot of time digging in the soil and tending plants and being outside. I go and walk and hike on the river trail here where I live regularly and in other places. Um, and spending time with my kid, who's just like a really great invitation into absurdity and play and like shifting out of and it feels so important to hold the complexity of I now more than ever, we need all of us to keep showing up and
Yeah.
like not at cost to ourselves. So how are we, especially inside of like privilege and self-care culture, really holding nuance around like, yes, we must slow down and we must care for ourselves and each other. We must be nourished. And also in a way that like resources us to continue and to be in the flow. And that challenges the grind of capitalism that says like no, I don't want to participate in that, even while we all still must survive and therefore here we are participating. So kid time helps me kind of like transcend all of the nonsense and
Totally.
that is good. I also weave willow baskets, and that's another way of kind of transcending the nonsense, is getting really fixated in the physical craft and the plants and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
the thing.
incredible.
Mhm.
Incredible.
And
And
grief
that's all connected.
ritual too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, grief ritual.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Holding like being in the collective healing work is part of taking care of myself and others also. And retreat space.
Yeah.
I'm getting ready to host a queer healing retreat on land this weekend, and I've just been preparing herbal bundles and tea and a grief ritual time, but also like we're gonna just rest and relax and go swimming and be
Yeah.
together in community.
Yeah. These moments for all of the range of emotions that we're going to feel, and again, it's not binary, it's really
Yeah,
expansive.
right. Mhm.
Nicole, I'm so grateful just to know you and to learn from you and for the work that you put out in the world and the way that you can really live in the spaciousness of it all and the complexity of it all. I'm really grateful to you.
Taking that in. I appreciate that. Just, yeah, so grateful to get to have the space with you also for the work that you're up to as well.
Thank you, Nicole.
You're so welcome. Thank you.